Good morning.
Morning,
everyone, and welcome to this debate about democracy, especially democracy on the European level. That is what we're going to discuss for the next hour or so. We have an excellent panel with people up here who all have been working with or engaged in different kinds of democracy building. They are experts on each their different level. So what is very important, I think, is that everybody in the tent is not only welcome but almost obliged to participate in the debate. I really want you to chip in so that this is not going to be a closed conversation among experts. We want to have a dialogue in the tent about democracy and how it works and how it could work even better. So that's the aim. I have a microphone here, and I'm going to run down and give it to you whenever you want to chip into the debate. So please let us know whenever you have questions or opinions or anything you want to say. Please feel free. But up here, my name is Jakob. I'm editor-in-chief of a Danish news organization called Altinget. We write about politics, and I used to work in Brussels for quite some years, covering European institutions. So I've also been thinking about this European democracy and how it works and what is the media responsibility in making it work for many, many years. I haven't found the solution, maybe today. And with me in the panel I have Kathrine Richter, who is the chairperson of a political party that is called Volt, as you can see on the t-shirt. It's not the Volt bringing out the pizzas, it's another Volt. Kathrine is probably going to tell us more about that, but it's a pan-European party trying to run on a common platform in many different countries. So that is something that we haven't seen quite like that in Europe. Until now we have a social democratic party in each country and a conservative party in each country running separately, but Volt is trying to create one party that is going to be cross-European, and that's a very interesting experiment that we're going to talk about. Then we have Zoe Elkær Nicot. I hope I pronounced it right, otherwise you have to correct me. You used to be a member of what in Danish is Dansk Ungdoms Fællesråd. I'm not sure if you're still in Dansk Ungdoms Fællesråd, a Danish youth council that is umbrella organization for Danish political organizations for young people. And also you're one of the co-founders of European Debate Initiative. And you're going to tell us more about what that is about, and your work for the European Debate Initiative led to you receiving the EU Citizen Prize in 2021 from the European Parliament. So you've already got a lot of experience working with cross-European debate. Then we have Kathrine, who is, as your name maybe implies, is from Italy, and Federico works at the European Movement International. Is that the right word? European Movement International? So it's the umbrella organization for pro-European movements all over Europe. And Federico studied in Milan, is that in English? Yeah, and Brussels, but also in Aarhus, so he's also a little bit Danish inside. And the same goes for our last panelist, Michiel Maertens, who is the ambassador to Denmark for the Kingdom of Belgium, and who has been working with EU also for many, many years, and in the EU institutions also, or at least as a Belgian representative in the EU institutions. Michiel has also been living in Denmark quite a few times, and at some point he met a very attractive Danish woman, and he's now married to a Dane, so Michiel is also a Danish speaker and almost half Danish, I would say. Is that right? No, not really. Okay. We'll come back to that. Okay, let's now move into the talk about democracy, and I want to have a quick round first, and I want to just have maybe pretty short, almost yes and no answers. In your opinion, the four of you, do we have a functioning European democracy today? Is it a well-functioning democracy that we have in Europe today? Not in each country, but at a European level. Kathrine, if you had to just say very briefly, almost yes or no, what would be your answer?
Unfortunately, we don't have a functioning democracy on the European level, no.
Okay. So what do you think?
It depends whether you mean our institutions, our
transparent and democratic, and we do it fair, but if we lack participatory tools to engage everyone in the democracy, no. So yes.
Okay, so the institutions are democratic, but we need tools to engage the people in the democratic process.
Yeah, so we have the rule of law and we have all those checks at least in those parameters.
Okay. Federico, what would be your take?
I would say that it's not fully democratic, and I would slightly disagree with Zoe. I believe that we have quite a good number of participatory tools, but I guess the problem comes from the institutions.
The problem comes from the institutions.
The institutions are maybe not fully democratic. So
okay. And Michiel, what is your take? Democracy, do we have it or not?
We have it, but the problem is that the execution could be a lot. I mean, we have the institutions, but the problem is we should make more use of what we have. Because EU decision-making has advanced so far, and it's like we have forgotten about that. In the member states, we're not talking enough about Europe. It's fully democratic, and there I agree. We have tools, but we don't use them. And we should not compare the EU to just the member states. The EU is something unique, so it's a bit difficult to compare with something else. So I think there's a lot to be improved, but I think the basic setup is fully democratic.
Okay, interesting. Now I want to ask you, everybody in the tent, think first about the country where you live, your home country. Do you find that your home country is a well-functioning democracy? If you do, raise your hand. Okay. And how many do not find that their home country is a well-functioning democracy? Okay, that's already surprising. Now, on a European level, how many feel that the European democratic institution is well-functioning from a democratic point of view? Raise your hand if you think Europe is functioning democratically. Yeah, a few optimists over here, but not a lot of other people. Okay, and how many do not feel that Europe is democratic enough? Okay, that's a clear majority. So, okay, I have two takeaways from this little opinion poll. One is that there's actually quite some skepticism about national democracy, maybe more than I would have thought, and there's absolutely no enthusiasm for the European democracy. And let's try to find out what is the main problem. Kathrine, if there was one thing you could change tomorrow in the way Europe works, what would be the most important thing to change to make Europe more democratic?
Oh wow! I would probably abolish the council.
Okay, and let's just make a quick break here for a little. For a little recap on the European institutions, we have 3 European institutions. We have the European Parliament, where 705 members are directly elected from the different countries. 14 of them are from Denmark. That's the European Parliament. We have the European Commission, where countries have one commissioner, and the Commission is the institution that can propose new laws in Europe. And then we have the Council, where ministers from each country gather to actually vote about new laws, whether they should come into effect or not. And they have different, very complicated rules about when they have to all agree to vote for a new law and when it's enough to just have a majority. But you say abolish the council, so a country like Denmark should no longer send its ministers to Brussels to vote for a new law. Does that mean that laws should only be voted in the European Parliament?
I think what I'm trying to say is that the council meets in closed sessions, closed room sessions, and I think if we're really honest about where we want Europe to go, then I think we should really consider how our votes, when we cast our votes in the European Parliament elections, how they're actually being used, because the European Parliament cannot initiate new laws. So our elected officials have to wait. Well, they can ask for laws to be started off, but they can't initiate new laws. We have to wait for the Commission, which is again appointed by national leaders, to come up and agree and say, okay, let's actually do something about climate change. But let's not move too quickly, because we have to make sure that everybody feels that they can actually work within the new guidelines. And that's what should be happening anyway. There's a mistrust in the European systems when we feel that countries can't be adequately heard unless they have a closed room session where they have one.
So let me just be clear. Of course, you're not going to in 2 minutes just draw up a whole new European constitution. But in principle, you're saying, forget a little bit about the Commission, forget about the Council. Let's have a European Parliament with directly elected people. Let them propose new laws, let them adapt new laws, and let that be the European governing body.
Absolutely.
Okay. Michiel, you seem to not fully agree on this one.
I find it's a very scary idea, because I think the Council is one of the most democratic institutions, because that's where accountability is.
How is that?
You talk about closed session. Every position of every member state is defended in their national parliaments. They're defending the national interests, also the national problems. And you're going to impose it by the parliament, where the majority decides, has no idea about a country like Belgium or Denmark. I think that's an extremely scary anti-democratic proposal. The role of the European Parliament, when it was created, was to control the Commission, which is something supranational. And it's very good that we gave the sole right of initiative to the Commission to be neutral, independent from member states, also from particular interests which are represented in the European Parliament. I think democracy in the European Union, it's all the institutions. So the control of the Commission, and that's very important. That's why we have the European Parliament. But to take care of, and the subsidiarity principle, it's one of the basis of democracy in the European Union, that you take into consideration the particularities of every country.
But you have to admit, Michiel, that just as you're talking about it now, it already becomes very, very complex. So we have the neutral Commission that takes the initiative, we have the European Parliament, you say their role is to control the Commission, and the Council is the democratic. I mean, is it not a problem in itself that it's so complicated that you need a 7-year education just to understand how it works?
At least it shows that education is a good thing. But to be fair, the European construction is something very unique. It has never been done before. And we have to remember where we come from. So we have to strengthen cooperation, that people realize climate change, this is not something you do within your borders.
Okay, so let's hear what you think. You also said yes, the institutions are quite democratic, but we're totally failing on getting involvement from ordinary people, so to speak. What is the problem? What would be your quick fix if you just had one magic solution you could use?
Yes, so what I meant with the what them being democratic was not, of course, the participatory elements, but more the fact that we have the basic rules and order, like we have transparency, we have the rule of law, and things like that. But what my quick fix would be to abolish in at least many areas, in some policy areas, the councils or where the ministers sit, they have to all agree. On when there's a decision to be made, they have to agree, all of them. And that's the culture, that's the rules. So I think that I would abolish, at least for largely almost all policy areas.
And what is the point here? The point here is that sometimes now just one country being against a new law is enough to block it, so it doesn't happen. And you think it should be much more difficult to veto or to block new laws that are being proposed in Europe?
Yes, I believe that will make decisions more democratic, but also it would make the European Union more efficient, because that's also always the criticism. It's too slow, we react too slowly, and maybe you've heard that in some European countries, for example Poland and in Hungary, there are some problems with their democracy, which is really serious. And when the EU is trying to kind of mitigate that and try to find a solution, then Hungary and Poland can just, back each other up and say, hey, we're going to veto that decision, then you help us next time. So that's one of the things that I think is really a problem. And then other quick fixes would be increase European Parliament powers. I think because the European Parliament is the only institution where you guys can go down and vote for someone that you like. And then if I could have all the powers in the world, that would also make those elections transnational, meaning that if you down there find a candidate that you like from Sweden or from Malta or from Germany, you can also vote for them. Because that would also increase this pan-European identity or feeling that we actually are in an institution, a European Union, that is not just our country.
Super interesting proposal. Let's have a quick referendum on that proposal. So the idea here is today when you vote for the European Parliament, you can only vote for Danish candidates if you live in Denmark, or for Swedish candidates if you live in Sweden, and so on. The idea that you should be able to vote for any candidate in any EU country for a European election, how many think that is a good idea? Okay, and how many think it's a bad idea? I think there's a slight majority for pan-European elections. That's already a very big decision we're taking here today. Federico, now I want to add you to the debate. You're from Italy, and you of course know Europe very well. But one thing about Italy is that usually, as being one of the 6 founding members of the European Union, traditionally you would say that someone from Italy is much more pro-European than someone from Denmark. Are you more pro-European than what you're hearing now from Zoe and from Kathrine?
Okay, so that's a personal question. I don't think so. I think we're all very pro-European. If not, none of us would be here. We're here at the political festival of Europe, so of course not. It's true, Italy historically has been a strongly pro-European country. We have to admit also that things have slightly changed in the last 10 years with strong Eurosceptic, populist, anti-EU rhetoric that has really taken root in some parts of our society. Of course, this is undeniable and it's very important.
And you might in very few weeks have a very not pro-European Prime Minister in Italy after the next elections.
Let's see. Hopefully not. So yeah, we're going to have this snap election the 25th of September. It's a very serious election because we have these two very different, fundamentally different coalitions in there. One that is led by a post-fascist party, led by Giorgia Meloni, who is the leader of the ECR group in the European Parliament. And they have a rather, to use a euphemism, reactionary agenda. And the other one is the left-wing coalition that, according to the polls, will never win. But there's still time, we shall see. Let's try not to stick too much to the polls. So yeah, and perhaps if I may super quickly try to draw on some things that have been said here, because there were some very conflicting, let's say, different views. On the one hand, I have to agree with the ambassador that, Kathrine, you cannot say, let's abolish a European institution. You cannot say that. It's not democratic, it's an institution that has been shaped and has been shaping the European Union in the process of integration for many, many years. On the other hand, I completely agree with you and with you, Zoe, that of course the way the democratic functioning of the EU needs to be improved, needs to be changed. We agree on that. You've also mentioned some very good ideas.
And what is your most important change if you had to just choose one very important thing?
About the institutional aspect or in general?
Yeah, about the European democracy.
About European democracy, it's of course make it more and more participatory and deliberative.
Okay, more participatory. So more participation from voters. We're going to come back to that. I think that's a very important issue and a very difficult issue as well. Michiel, now your magic solution. You just have one. What do you need to change? Is everything good as it is?
No, it's not good as it is, but there's no simple solution. I think it's extremely populistic to pretend that we can fix complex problems very easily. What I would do is have a look at the lengthy procedures, and I think also the full involvement of the European Parliament hasn't helped in speeding up the processes. On the contrary, if you like complex piece of legislation on climate change and so on, then you see what happens. Lobbying groups go to the European Parliament and interests prevail. And that's very scary from a democratic point of view. So it's something we have to look at, how we deal with that. But I think initiatives like today, we're having the discussion, I think that's extremely important for democracy. In every member state, that we know it's complex. What are we doing? What are the options? I think strengthening this kind of consultations, dialogues, is very healthy for democracy, the national ones, and of course also the European one, because it starts from every single national democracy. If you just put everything in the European Parliament, you're going to lose the member states. And I'm very, very worried about that. If you have a wave of populism saying these people in Brussels are deciding and forcing it upon us.
So your point is that European democracy needs to actually have its root in each member state. You cannot place it in Brussels and say democracy is something that happens down there. It has to happen in each member state. But I think there's a tendency that we all know, maybe less so in Belgium than in other countries, but maybe also in Belgium. But in every other European country, there's a tendency that if something good happens, it's Denmark that has won a very big victory in the European Union, and if something bad happens, it's just the European Union that is good. And that makes it hard, I think, for many politicians or for the EU to be popular, because it's very easy for national politicians to blame the EU when something happens that is not exactly on their agenda. How should we solve that?
I think if we start to talk more about the European Union, about all legislation in Denmark, but not only in every single member state, more than half of it is partly decided among EU partners. I mean, that's a reality. But if I hear politicians in my country, it's like they decide on whatever. But that's not true. So basically, they cannot deliver because they don't control it. And that's not the problem itself, but we have to be more open about it and to be more inclusive. And it starts bottom up in every single member state and not just the institutions in Brussels. And that's why I say that the Council is very democratic, because every minister going, and that's only the end of a lengthy process. I mean,
every minister needs to actually win an election in their home country and to explain what they want to do.
And it's easy to say, okay, on the overall European level, this is the best, and too bad for this and that country. I'm very worried about the reaction about the population there, and I don't think that those people say that's democratic. So it's a matter of balances, but that's part of the European construction, the diversity. And I think we have to defend our diversity. It has a lot of advantages as well, but it makes it complicated.
Kathrine, I want to take that to you in a second, but first I want to say welcome to all the new people that arrived in the tent. Let me just say again that I'm hoping that this is not going to be a conversation just happening up here. So please let us know if you want to join in, if you have a question, if you just have an opinion or anything. And there are no stupid questions in this area. I promise you, I've covered the EU. I have posed a lot of stupid questions myself because it is difficult and it's very complex. And all questions are okay and all opinions are okay. So please join in if you want to be in the debate. The microphone is right here. I will come out. Yeah, we have someone already. Okay, good. So Kathrine, you have to wait for a second. Please present yourself.
Hello, I'm Pedro from Portugal.
Okay.
And I want to tell you a story. In my country, courts have no paper.
Hold it a little closer. It's not too long, please.
Okay. Courts have no paper. Okay? I don't know if you can imagine that. A courthouse that has no paper. And yet, the Portuguese government decided to give 3 billion euro to the airline of that country. Only one airline, the public airline.
Okay. And what is the point for European democracy on this?
So, we depended on European Union to get this approved. Sometimes the European Union makes decisions very concretely about a country. What I feel is that at that level, the European Union plays a bit as a continuation of the governments. I think if European institutions were more democratic, that I can vote for them, they can cope with the agenda of the people and not the agenda of the governments, national governments that take those wrong decisions. I felt that the European Union was trapped by the national interest defended by the government, not by the national government, not the national interest of the citizens, because they have no direct relation with the citizens. And I would like that to be changed.
So more elections on European levels, or?
Well, at least some sort of accountability.
More accountability.
To the citizens and not to the, stupid governments.
Okay, good, thank you. And let me throw that to you, Kathrine. How do we actually, so we've talked about this now, that there's some kind of lack of participation. How can we make Europe more open for participation? What are the tools that we need?
Well, one idea that's been floating around is to make new regional electorates. So that, for example, when you vote for an EP, they don't come from a national country; they come from a region. And with 500 million people living in the EU, maybe we would then divide those regions into how many people actually live in those regions, and then you get a regional representative. You might say that's one idea that's literally floating around. But I think it's important to also note that while there is history in the European institutions, and while we're grateful for everything that we've achieved through many other people's hard work, we should not be. We should be courageous in looking at what does the European Union want to become and what we want to achieve with the European Union, because we're 4 or 5% of the citizens of the world live in Europe, and with global interests now, we have to look at how do we have an efficient union. And I think that there is that concern that member states are not being heard, but I think we as citizens need to make sure that the agendas of the people are being heard much more.
And how do you want to achieve that?
Okay, so the lobbying that you were mentioning is a big problem. It's a big problem in the European institutions that we have lobbying from very professional organizations that have nothing to do with the people, and they have very big influence in the way that ideas come about, which legislation.
But you have to admit also that in the European Parliament there is actually a public register of lobbyists where they have to register. You can see who is lobbying, whereas in Denmark you can never see who has lobbied a minister before an election.
You're very right, and I wish that there was more reporting done on who lobbies who on those things. Maybe, every time we turn on the news, there's always something about the sports at the end, but why isn't something about the European Union institutions? They literally have so much influence over our day-to-day lives. I think there's a big responsibility with also media communicating what's happening, and I think, if I'm being quite honest, I do believe that there's more communication happening in Belgium about the European institutions, because at the end of the day, this is in Brussels, than happens in a lot of the other member states. So I think we need to demand a lot more communication also coming from the media.
We need more information about the EU, and I think this tent is maybe another wake-up call to the media that people actually care about Europe. So don't worry about reporting about it. I think many editors think that people find it boring, but I'm not sure that's right. I want to challenge you a little bit, Zoe, and say, why is it actually important to have participation in European democracy? Because you could also say, most Danish people don't know the details about a new law about train safety in Denmark. They never engage in that debate. And why should they actually engage in a very complex, very technical debate on a European level about a new law? Shouldn't we just be happy that someone is doing all the boring meetings to adapt that law? And have confidence that our ministers and the Swedish ministers and the Italian ministers are doing a great job. Why should we spend more time with European democracy actually, as citizens?
I'm very glad that you asked me that, because actually the Danish Folketing and the Danish Parliament, they realized that I think we have a problem with being too late when it comes to European legislation, because they realized, someone in the committee working on European affairs, they realized, sometimes when there is legislation coming from the EU, coming from Brussels, then suddenly we have to implement it in our country. But then maybe we didn't get a say, or we came too late, and then it was all the other countries, they already agreed. So there has been a process in the Danish Parliament where they tried to find out, okay, how can we get involved earlier? So I'm hoping that that will happen, but it's again a very slow process. Why is participation super important? It's because the things that is coming from the European Union, it's something that, first of all, we have negotiated as well, because we are part of that union, Denmark. Second of all, it has impacts on our everyday lives. You probably already heard of the debate on leave barselsregler. You probably heard this whole debate. Some people are really against it, some people are really for it.
That some of it is now reserved for the father.
Exactly.
That needs to be in every country.
Exactly. So there's so many of these discussions that are going on in Denmark, but they're going on 5 years too late, because those rules were negotiated maybe 5 years ago in the European institutions, and that's the problem in Denmark. And then just one point on participation from citizens instead of the parliamentarians and the politicians. I want to ask you all a question, since a lot of the people in here are young people. If I say the word EU Youth Dialogue, have you ever heard of that term before?
Great, another friend of mine said EU Youth Dialogue. How many have heard about it?
If you've ever heard it, put up your hand. I haven't heard about it. I'm the only one. Kathrine, amazing.
Oh, there's one more down there.
One down there.
Yes.
Okay, well, I'm not going to explain it really quickly because it's very telling and it's a problem that we don't know about it. It's a process where the European Union is trying to include young people. And you mentioned in the beginning that I'm part of DOEF. It doesn't say here, but it's Dansk Ungdomsfællesråd, this umbrella organization. And they are choosing 2 young people from Denmark to represent young people in the European institutions. And I'm one of those. You probably never heard of this. I never heard it before joining that project either. But I realized in that process that the things we're being consulted on, you mentioned consultation before, it's not really real. And what they do is they ask us questions, what do Danish young people think about this, about climate, about democracy, about all these things. Then we have to go out and ask young people like you, which is also a reason to be here today. Then we report back to the EU institutions. Then we talk to the council, where all the ministers sit. We sit and we do speeches to them and say, yes, great. And then they write up a document and that's it. So that's a problem for me, that the participation for young people, for civil society, for organizations that really want to say, it's not inclusive.
But it comes a little bit back to the question I asked you. I mean, the whole point about representative democracy is that you elect someone to make the decisions, and it's of course not physically possible for 100 million young people in Europe or for 500 million Europeans to participate all at the same time. So try again to explain, why do you think it's important that we have more participation? Why not say, we get great decisions, sometimes bad decisions, that's the rule of democracy, but all in all it's okay.
I think the answer to that question is obvious, and even if you take it back to national level, for example, on climate change, you all are young people, and many of you probably also involved in like climate demonstrations, or you think that the political parties in the Folketing are not doing enough. That's also participation, right? You're voicing your concern, and it's the same at European level. So of course it matters what citizens think. I don't think that should be even a question, because if you elect it, of course you have to represent those people. But if we as citizens are not happy, we want to protest, we want to be included, but that process has to be meaningful. And because if it's just for show, as it is right now, it's really a shame. And I'm one of the most pro-European people you can ever find, so it's not a criticism of Europe as a project, but I really want to improve it.
Okay, Federico, what is your take on that? Is there a way to find a process to include young people more in an already complicated process, to make it even more complicated?
Well, yeah, it's very complicated. I think it's good maybe to start drawing from what Pedro said, if I'm not wrong. Pedro has mentioned what we are discussing, the democratic deficit. Whether this exists or not, how we can improve it or not. What is that essentially? It's the fact that normal people, citizens, Europeans, perceive the European Union as something distant, something abstract almost, something that we cannot actually grasp, and something that essentially, to be a bit brutal, does not care about the needs. Pedro has made a clear example, and it's very interesting to see that you've mentioned that governments are taking decisions, and where is the European Union? This is a very interesting thing to say. Let's not forget that governments are the European Union. Okay, the same goes with member states. Member states are the European Union, and vice versa. Let's keep this in mind because it's very important. This is already part of the discussion to understand how to, let's say, bridge this democratic deficit. Because when you hear people saying, I come from a country in which populism, anti-EU rhetoric has been very strong, and when you hear politicians say, Brussels told us to do that, Brussels didn't tell you anything. You voted for that. You were there, you discussed it as a member state, as a government, as a European Parliament, also with the bureaucrats in the European Commission, because last time I checked, we also have Italians working in the European Commission. So you see, words are very important. And I just wanted to pick up on that because I think it was a great point. And to answer to your point, specifically on young people, on the one hand, we need to, I'm essentially building on what you said, there are already existing participatory tools that are quite big and they are quite accessible. The problem is indeed how much do we know about them, how can we use them. for example, the European Citizen Initiative, the public consultations of the European Commission. Everybody can go to the website of the European Commission when there's a proposal of...
But have you tried going into the website of the European Commission?
It's part of my job, of course, and I'm getting there because I know what you're trying to say. It's tricky.
It's
not
not
easily
tricky.
accessible.
Yeah.
There have been several complaints. For example, simple example, the European Disability Forum has been saying that these platforms are not accessible for persons with disabilities. It's a very random example, but very effective. We need to make these tools more accessible, more easy. Also, for not everybody's a TikToker, super tech-savvy person. Nobody is. Even I consider myself a rather young person, and sometimes I struggle when I'm on these platforms. So, of course, there are existing participatory tools that need to be improved, need to be strengthened, need to be more accessible to young people, but also to people from all walks of life. And on the other hand, create new tools or further the scope of already existing tools. Maybe, I don't know if anybody has heard of the Conference on the Future of Europe.
Let's have
Can you raise the hand?
Anybody heard about that conference on the future of Europe? Yes. You've heard about everything. You're an EU expert down there. That's great.
You see,
There's a couple of people, but not a lot of people.
very few people, and almost no young person raised their hand. Completely fine. This is a great point. The Conference on the Future of Europe was a huge experiment that lasted 1 year. I was going to Strasbourg every session. I took part in all the works and the plenary sessions. Essentially, what did they do in freelance? Because I know that I'm talking a lot. In freelance, what did they do? They randomly selected 800 citizens from all walks of life, from all over Europe, no matter where you come from.
800?
800. They brought them together with elected representatives from all the institutions, both local, regional, national, European institutions, and governments, of course, and then also, let's say, civil society representatives, social partners. They put them together in a room, I'm being too brutal in the explanation, to discuss what kind of Europe we want. What's the future that we want? There have been debates, citizens' debates, a beautiful initiative that we hope will be further improved and done. And then they come up after 1 year of extremely intense conversations, you cannot imagine, and extremely beautiful in my opinion, with 49 final recommendations.
With how many?
49 final recommendations. It's like a huge report divided into recommendations. And all these recommendations have been approved, and the institutions have pledged and promised to take them into account and deliver on them. So, where are we at now? We don't know. It's a struggle. The European Commission has promised to mention it in the State of the Union speech, which is the annual speech of the European Commission President. It's a very important moment that, speaking of communication, is not very much followed. And there's going to be another event. There have been discussions about the convention, which is essentially a way to amend the treaties or not. And also, the most important thing, if you look at these recommendations, this is the key point, and I feel the key takeaway of the Conference on the Future of Europe. They were extremely spot on and appropriate, coming from citizens, because all this input, the starting point was the input of these normal citizens, that they knew nothing about the European Union. I worked with them a lot. You have no idea how many times they came to me. It's like, I got a call from Brussels, I thought it was a joke, and they hung up.
And what would you say was the most important of the 49 recommendations from the...
They are extremely broad, and they're about several policies. But for me, the most important thing was that Europeans care about the European Union. Europeans want to have their voice heard, and they want to make an impact.
Okay.
So that was the key success to me.
Okay, well, that's exactly one thing I want to pick up on, and I want to do that maybe with you, Michiel, because you've been working also as a representative in Brussels and been working with the EU for many years. I find that every 5 years or so, take or give a couple of years, the EU and also the Danish government launches an initiative a bit like this to say, now we really want to engage the people in Europe, we want to have a big debate about the future of Europe, and there's a lot of meetings and a lot of conferences, and I sometimes feel that it's maybe more to make the European Union feel good about itself, that, oh, we at least ask the people that actually to engage in a debate about Europe. What do you think about these Conference of Europe, all these youth initiatives that are being held? Is it useful, or is it a little bit of a facade?
But the Conference on the Future of Europe was not an initiative by my country, it was an initiative by the French President. Macron, and he wanted to have it. It had to be very quick. It has been done. And then the European Parliament thought, oh, this is fantastic. Let's have another institutional battle, have another treaty change. And that's where my criticism comes in. I don't think that is what we need today. The problems with the European Union is every 5th year we start to promise. We overpromise and we underdeliver, and I think that's basically the problem, because the things at hand are complex, so they take time. But we shy away and say, no, we have a solution, elect me and I'm going to fix it. But that's not possible. But one other point, I think that's something people talk about the Council, about the ministers, but it starts in the member state. If you have a proposal by the Commission, you look at it in Denmark, what does it mean for Denmark? What kind of legislation will we have to adapt? Why is it complicated? That's technical, but all of a sudden it becomes also political. And then in Denmark you have to make a compromise. What's going to be the Danish position? Because in Jutland you may have another challenge than you have in Copenhagen. You find a compromise. Every single member state has to do that. And of course there you also have politicians involved, and that's where it all starts. And then it comes to Brussels, and then we start a lengthy technical negotiation process in the Council. And then the European Parliament spent its time also discussing it. But it's about accountability. If I say, okay, this is fantastic for climate, but it means we have to change all this, the district heatings in every single city. Okay, let's do it. Oh, there's a price tag. Who's going to pay for that? How are we going to explain that to our citizens? It's complicated. And if you say, oh, it's just in Brussels, it's easy. If you don't have to talk to the people who are going to have to change the heating system, which they changed 2 years ago. And then you come into this conflict. So what are these people doing? Which mandate? On whose in which name are they talking? So that's why we have to be more aware, and I think this is very good in the Danish Parliament, this awareness. We have to engage in discussions, but it's also a matter of qualified majority voting. Denmark said, okay, we don't want this, but if there's a majority in the European Union, then we have this legislation coming, whether you like it or not. That's also part of democracy. And that's something we have to start to explain to our people. It's easy to say it's quicker, QMV, but it means if we disagree...
When you say qualified majority, it's this thing that we talked about already, the idea that you can vote and you can adapt something even if not everybody agrees.
Yes.
You don't have the veto power for one country.
Yes.
Yeah.
So there's a price. If you agree, it's fantastic, it's quicker. If it's just your position which is being ignored, I'm not sure your enthusiasm will be the same.
This is one of the big paradoxes of the EU, I guess, that on one hand many people want it to be more efficient and to work faster, and on the other hand we don't want to be overruled by the others.
Yeah.
Can we overcome that?
Yeah.
I think that's what VOLT is all about. Well, in fact, I know that's what VOLT is all about, because we have major challenges. We want things to happen, and we know that when things come, when it's being felt it's coming from top down, then we have a problem accepting it, because we don't necessarily trust the organizations or the institutions that propose the ideas. Now, we talk about transparency and the need for transparency because that is aligned with trust. The more we trust our institutions, the more we trust what comes out of them. Now, VOLT is really about, I wouldn't say bypassing the European institutions, it's about giving citizens a lot more knowledge, more power, and have a platform to actually enact political change. Because right now there are so many people who are being told, as we are today, that European politics is complicated, it's technical, it takes a long time. At the same time, we know that we don't have a lot of time when it comes to climate change. We've also heard now that we need citizens' participation. In fact, we want citizen participation. So this is why VOLT was being created, because we need a pan-European political party that addresses the need for European reform, that addresses the need to get people active in politics. Nobody is apolitical. We live the political decisions that other people make. And the moment that we realize that we need to be political, it may very well be too late, because that's when something terrible is happening to our world. So when it comes to the EU dialogues, when it comes to talking about what EU institutions can do, it definitely starts with us, and that's why we need a lot more. Hopefully, we'll have a lot more pan-European political parties, just like we have transnational lists coming up.
But isn't it very important that people know? That people know what policies their politicians stand for. I mean, one thing is to have a pan-European party, but interests don't disappear because you make a pan-European party. you still have either you're for minimum wages or you're against. There's still politics underneath.
I love you say that. We have intense debates. We recently, I don't know if you remember, but there was a discussion about nuclear energy and the
Are you for or against?
I'm for nuclear energy, and so is Walt. But I would say this, getting Germany on board with having pro-nuclear policy involved was very difficult. And it took a long time, just like you said, Michiel, things take a long time when you debate. But when you debate facts, figures against the needs for actual change on climate, then the debate becomes much more real. It doesn't become artisanal, it becomes real. So it took a long time, now we agree.
So I want to ask you and Federico also, looking at what has happened in Europe and in the world over the last decade, we've seen an American democracy in a lot of turmoil with President Trump, and we still don't know if he might even come back. We've seen what happened in the UK with Brexit, that is still kind of unfinished business. Has that changed the way you look at Europe and what the role of the EU should be?
For me, I guess yes, but I don't think it's changed me fundamentally. I always thought that Europe should have speak with a single voice. For example, when it comes to foreign policy, I think you mentioned, Kathrine, that European or the European region, the European continent, the European Union is very small when you look at the global population. And if any of you have been traveling during your summer holidays outside of Europe, you probably also thought like, oh wow, true. It's the center is not like the center of the world is not Europe, and we tend to forget that sometimes. So yes, I think in a more unstable world, there's been this term of European strategic autonomy, which is also one of those lovely European terms. But it basically just means that some politicians, it's definitely coming from France, but also many others, think that Europe should be able to play a stronger role in the world. Meaning we should be able to be more involved in crises, in the military capacity, though we should have more capacity, not be relying on the US. So there's a whole debate there. I pretty much agree with that stance. And I guess Trump and Brexit and everything has reinforced that. I had a question on the media, but maybe we can I ask it later?
Yeah, come on, we're heading towards the end, so let's bring it on.
Yeah, sorry for shifting it a little bit. But it's maybe a bit of a question for you as well.
I love that, we can switch.
I can switch the roles.
Yes.
Since you're chief editor of Alting, and I know Alting also has a great EU section, so kudos to that. But I also want to challenge a bit, because I know many of the people up here and in the room and elsewhere at the festival are really pushing for communication about the EU, are really engaged in those policies, me, myself included. But what if the media doesn't listen? So, and you also mentioned, I think earlier that, but we don't think our readers maybe are interested if there's the word EU. And I had a conversation as well with Stine Bosse about this, who is also very engaged in the European movement. So I wonder, what is the responsibility of, if you take the Danish perspective, Danish media? Because there is so little coverage, and if you look at the number of journalists that are stationed in Brussels and stationed in Folketinget, it's more than 10 times more. So there's in Folketinget, there's around, I don't remember, I think it's around 150 journalists that kind of have a badge, and they can go in and then they look what goes on in Folketinget and they report back. And the number of Danish media sending people to European institutions is 10 times less. Yeah. And so what's the role of the media?
I totally agree with everything you said. No, I really think it's a big problem. And I think that we have 2 reporters in Brussels, so that is probably the largest Danish representation in Brussels from any media organizations. Maybe Danmarks Radio has 2 as well. But it is a very big problem, and I think you can talk about the reasons for that for a very long time. I think one reason that is not an excuse, but I think is one explanation is that for many that the process is so slow that it's very, very difficult for journalists to find the right moment to cover an EU story, because the journalist will come to the editor and say, oh, they're having this debate in Brussels about whether to have minimum wages. It's really interesting. Maybe this is a bad example because it actually got a lot of coverage in Denmark as opposed to many other proposals. But often they will cover the proposal and the editor will say, oh, that sounds interesting. Is it about to be adopted? And the journalist will say, no, it's going to be a 3-year process. Oh, the editor will say, then come back in 3 years. We'll talk about it then. And then you don't really write about it because it's too early. And then the process goes on, and there's the council, there are hearings in the parliament, they have votes, they maybe have co-decision where they work together, and they have all the lobbyists, and everything happens. And at the end, they're going to adapt it, and the journalist comes back to the editor and says, so, now they're going to adapt. You remember what I said about this minimum wage? Now they're actually going to adapt it. Oh, the editor says, and what about, is there any excitement about where it's going to land? No, now the process is finished. Oh, but then we don't have to write about it because it's all done. This is a little bit of a caricature, but the reality of it is that in this very, very long process, it's often difficult to find the right time to actually do news journalism about it, and I think that's a big challenge for journalism. Maybe we need to redefine what is considered news and what is considered important stories. So now I turn into the panel. Sorry, yeah. But that made a lot of you react. Yeah.
Maybe to answer to your question that you asked, Zoe and I think the most important thing for me, you've mentioned what's been happening in the last 10, 15 years. For me, it's always, when it's about you, it's all about a wake-up call somehow. Because what I've realized is that we cannot take anything for granted. Starting from democracy or our own human rights. But think about it, I'm 28 and I'm going through what? The 5th world crisis? Something like that. The one in 2008 and 9, then in our case was a bit later in Europe, the migration crisis, health crisis. All of a sudden, what happened with that? The recession. Now there's another security crisis, energy price crisis. So my point is, how much the world has changed massively. Did you manage to keep up with that? I don't know. I don't think so. So to answer to your question is that, of course, as Zoe said, I agree with you. I've never really changed my opinion about the EU. I've always been very pro-European. But when I say wake up call, for me to be like, wow, something incredible there that we need to keep, we need to preserve. That's why you mentioned Brexit, rightfully great example, Trump, or anyway the situation at the border with Ukraine, which is terrifying to say the least. What's happening there is beyond horrendous. My point is we have something great that we need to preserve, but we cannot take it for granted. That's I don't know if it makes sense, but that's how I see it, because we don't know what else can happen. Like, I don't know if you remember Christmas 2019.
When you say we cannot take it for granted, what is your message to people in this room? Is it to participate in local democracy or in go into European discussions, or what is it that they need to do?
Well, I will never tell people what to do, but the message, of course, the key message is that you have a voice, you have a strong power, you may not realize it, but you can vote. You know, we live in democracies, elected representatives are the ones that take decisions, and you vote for them. We choose for them. So, you know, I come from a country in which 100 years ago we experienced fascism for 20 years, and we all know what happened, and especially how it ended up. But now you can express your preference. I can understand that I personally sometimes feel a bit alienated, or I feel that I'm not represented, my voice cannot be heard, but you have one. You do. So I think this it can sound a bit romantic, I know that, but let's not forget that, because we do have a voice.
Okay, we're into the final remarks now, because time has already run out.
I fully agree on that. I think on the media, maybe more focused on complexity, explaining processes, and it's not because there's a summit all of a sudden, are they going to make a decision or not, just to keep the background. So then you say, oh, looks like a tiny decision, but it's a step in the right direction. For instance, on the minimum wage, the question is, should Europe deal with that or not? As Belgium, of course, we have to have an overall framework in the European Union. And that takes a lot of explanation. Why there's a European dimension? It's not because some people in Brussels think, oh, let's annoy the Danes and impose that on that. No, it's because we need, in the internal market, social mobility, to have similar rules. And that's what it's all about. And I think that's making clear it doesn't stop at the Danish border. And starting to explain that, it's a lengthy process. In Belgium, our history has been much more easy. We have been the battleground of almost all battles in Europe. So we don't have to be convinced about the necessity of a European construction.
Right. I think I'm very happy you mentioned the minimum wage again, because if you're interested in that debate about whether minimum wage is a good thing or a bad thing, this is the place to be at 4 o'clock this afternoon. We're going to have a debate about exactly that issue. Now, Kathrine, you've been pointing a lot, so let's have a final remark from you.
Well, I want to say one thing. I mean, when you have a piece of legislation that will impact all of the European Union, isn't that a great process story? Isn't that where you as a journalist raise your hand and say, well, I know what I'll be focusing on the next 18 months? Or who is the rapporteur of this? What's their background? Who are the team members who will be leading this discussion? Who are the people behind the legislation? I think there are so many personal stories involved, because all of a sudden, once we become personal, once we know who our elected officials are, who those people who are working on legislation, who they are, becomes much bigger. I don't know if you remember the documentary on the GDPR legislation, maybe not, but it's really, really great, sorry. But I think once we have more information, our debates become a lot better, and we become part of the discussions. We've just in Denmark had a really, really broad discussion on our defense opt-out, and it was intelligent, it was targeted, but most importantly, everybody in the media were talking about it, and so the public debate also became better, and we actually ended up with a really, really great result, 60-40 in favor, which is incredible.
And a lot of participation, not least. Great, let's end on a positive note. Let's end it there. This was a debate that came both left and right and up and down, but I think we had a lot of good ideas about European democracy, so thank you very much for being on the panel. Thank you very much.